Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the workshop. So in one of our last videos, we did these rock-solid sawhorses, and if you missed that video, I'll leave a link to it down in the description. Just like I said, I went out and I got some 2x12s. I got it 16 feet, which I sawed in half, so I have two 8-foot boards here laid on top, and this is the beginnings of a really solid temporary workstation that'll help us to build everything else. Now I went and I screwed mine down to the sawhorse because I don't intend to move this around a whole lot right now. But, you know, having this available to just kind of toss up and, you know, set up in your driveway as a temporary station is really beneficial sometimes. But you can see, it's got a little wobble because it's just sawhorses, but this is a solid table, you know, and it supports my weight, which is more than enough for anything that we're going to do. What we're going to do today is, in my introductory tool video, I mentioned that I recommend having a circular saw as one of your first tools. Now, by itself, this is not all that useful, but we're going to make this regular circular saw into what's known as a track saw. We're going to create a jig that will allow this to ride on top of it and cut in a very straight line, which is really going to help us out for breaking down sheet goods later on, which is really all I use this for. Now, before we get started making our jig, let's talk about circular saws a little bit. And I want to make this very clear. First of all, do not buy cheap ones. I bought a really cheap one, and this is going to get replaced as soon as possible. But basically, you have a motor mounted to a movable steel plate with a blade directly connected to the motor and a little guard that swings out of the way. This plate is like 16th of an inch thick stamped steel, which is just awful. The mount, you can see, if you can see it, you push on it a little bit and the plate moves. So it's not as stable as I would like it. Make sure that when you're buying one of these, you get one with a good solid base that isn't going to move around with a little bit of pressure. And I'll explain why. So when we're doing our track saw, this edge is going to run up against a fence. Now, in order for this to work, the blade needs to be parallel to the fence. Otherwise, we're going to have the blade wandering all over. We could end up with some kickback, which is no good. Now, I've pushed and tweaked this considerably to try and get it as close to parallel as possible, and I still need to push it a little bit more. But if you get a decent one, then you don't have to do this, and you'll end up with a much safer, more reliable system. All right, now for this project, we're going to start off with a sheet of 1/4 inch plywood. That will be the track or base and fence material that we're using. The first thing we need to do is determine how wide the track needs to be. So we're going to set our blade, our circular saw, up on the table as if it were making a cut. Push the fence up against there and just measure how much we need. And it looks to be about 3 1/4. I'm going to go with 4 inches because we want a little bit extra for trimming it off. Now I need to make another measurement, because on the back of the motor here, the motor sticks out quite a bit in the back. Let me move you around so you can see that better. So the motor back here sticks out quite a bit. And when we're using this, we're going to be putting clamps down to hold the piece in place, the fence. So if I grab one of my clamps here, all right, you can see we don't want this to bump into the clamp as we're running it along the track. So I want to give myself plenty of room for clamping, which looks like about 4 inches should be plenty past the motor. The motor is currently measuring 4, so 8, no, you know what, it's 3 inches looks like enough. So yeah, we're gonna make the fence come out 7 inches past the fence point. This will likely be different for every saw manufacturer slightly, not by much, but slightly. So make sure you're measuring your saw so that you get a track that's made for what you have. Now the first cut that we're gonna make is for the fence part, and mine was 7 inches. And the reason we're making this cut first is because I want this nice factory edge. It's probably the most reliably straight part, so we want to maintain that straight edge through the process so that we end up with a straight guide. And we're just going to mark it at 7 here, take a couple measurements, mark it here. Now we're going to take a nice long ruler and connect our lines. And it's okay if this cut ends up wandering a little bit because we're going to do this freehand. As long as we maintain that factory edge, and we're going to make a little mark up here to make sure that we know that this is our freehand cut and not reliably straight side. All right, let's clamp this down and we can start a cut. Okay, so what I've done to prepare for this cut is I've raised the blade height. All right, we're only cutting 1/4 inch material, so we really don't need blades sticking out this far. It makes for excessive risk. So I've raised the blade depth to maybe 1/2 inch, which should be fine. And it'll also help bring the blade guard back. So I've also rechecked it for parallel, which, this kind of sort of is. Now we're going to get our eye protection, ear protection, and we'll plug this in and make our cut. All right, so I don't know if you can see the pencil line, but you can tell the curve went all kinds of wonky. And, that's why circular saws just are not meant for doing really nice cuts, but we're gonna try and fix that. Now, we're going to cut the next piece. So we have our fence. Now we need our base. Now our base needs to be as wide as the fence plus 4 inches for the saw track. So if this was 7, our next piece is going to be 11. All right, now we're going to flip this around. So we're cutting off the waist side. Actually, you know what? I've changed my mind. I'm going to measure this from the other direction. And we'll just discard this wavy, crooked end, and we'll use another factory edge over here. All right, now this board is, I don't know, we could probably use it for some small project later on, but it's mostly junk at this point. And I also decided to measure this out to 11.5 just to allow myself a little error on this one. More base is always better than less base. We can always trim it off afterwards. I'm going to measure out the 4 inches on the base here for the saw track. I'm going to measure this in several spots because I want to make sure that we have plenty of room to trim off the excess. And we're going to take that factory edge and we're going to line it up with those marks as best as possible. Even give ourselves a little extra if we have to. In fact, I have plenty of extra here. I'm gonna check that again just to be super sure that we made this correctly. Yeah, and we got plenty of room there. Measure twice, cut once. That's the best way to do it. Doing it the other way around just doesn't work. All right, so minor oversight on my part. During the move, I ended up giving away my glue because I didn't want to transport it down. And I don't have any. I forgot to buy some. All I have are some screws. Now these are 1/4-inch boards, so you know I have 1/2-inch screws. If I were to screw through 2 boards, I would end up with the point poking out a little bit or something sticking up, and I don't really want that. So I'm going to take this piece of scrap 1/4 here, and I'm going to use that for a top piece, which gives me just over 1/2 inch. This being plywood, it's not exactly 1/4. They're usually much thinner, but that'll work out. And you know, we'll lose only a little bit of depth of cut on here. We just won't be able to drop this down all the way because then the motor will end up rubbing on the board. But like I said, I use this just for plywood, so it's not really that big a deal. Never really cutting more than 3/4 inch anyway. Alright, so I got some 1/2-inch screws here, and this is where a good countersink bit comes in real handy, something with a depth stop to it, because we don't want to drill through to the bottom of the board. So we're just going to set the drill, take a small countersink, and set the depth right about there. So we're going to screw this down all over just to make sure nothing moves around. So a lot of screws. I would have preferred glue, but I don't have any at the moment, and I don't feel like going to get any. All right, turns out that my impact driver is a touch too aggressive, and ended up forcing the screws through the bottom anyway, so I just re-drilled some new holes, and this time we're going to go in nice and careful with a hand screwdriver so that we don't have any issues. Oh well, live and learn. That's why we make these mistakes on shop furniture rather than finished pieces. Alright, so now to finish this project up. We need to make the final cut for the zero clearance fence line, and I think I'm going to use a tape trick here just to make sure that there's no tear out. Of course, we're cutting with the grain, so it really shouldn't be an issue, but I got plenty of blue tape, so it's not a big deal. What this will do is it will help to reinforce the wood fibers and prevent any chipping or tearing from the blade. Alright, let's check the blade one more time, because this is the part that's really important. We got to have that fence as even as possible. So if we mess up here, it's going to be messed up forever. Actually, adjust the depth here too. Alright, so I've set this for slightly over 1 inch because I'm really never going to do more than that. And that's pretty much where the blade is going to stay from now on. And slightly off. Give it a little tweak. Hopefully you don't have to do this. You got a decent saw. I tweaked that way too much. Yeah, get a decent saw. Don't do this. I'm going to be replacing this as soon as possible. And I'll probably have to make a new guide for it, but that's okay. Alright, that looks pretty good to my eye for now.
till I get a new saw, then we do this all over again. All right, now remember which direction we're cutting in. We want the fence on the thicker side, so we're going to be going in this direction. And we're going to want to push this up against the fence as much as possible and just kind of glide the saw down. We don't want to put any pressure on it in one direction or another. We just want to keep it up against the fence so we make a nice straight cut. If all went well, we should have a fence that follows the blade perfectly. And that looks really good. Now, I would say let's see this in use. However, I don't have any scrap wood available to use it on. So, alright, so I'm just going to give you a quick example of how this is going to work in the shop. Let's say that this is a piece of plywood. And we've measured and we've marked out a nice line where we want it. Hopefully you can see that. Then all we're going to do is take our cutting guide, put the edge of that right against the line. Just like that. And we clamp it down, run the circular saw on the jig, which is going to cut right on this line and give you a nice straight cut right where you marked it. Alright, so that is it. That is our homemade track saw. I drilled a hole through the top. That's going to help me to hang it up on a wall. Now, I made mine 4 feet long. For breaking down sheet goods, you know, that's usually the size that I'm cutting across the plywood, breaking it into smaller pieces. You can make these for any size, any application. You can go as long as 8 feet. You know, just get yourself an 8-foot piece of plywood and cut that factory edge. But really great to have these around, you know, really helpful anytime you need them. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed this short little project. If you did, give me a thumbs up. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. Leave me some comments if you have any questions. Now, we came, we saw, we made some sawdust. Now it's your turn. Go out and make something, and I'll see you next time.